The theme of this series is to disrupt the certainty that I observe people have around these topics, but with the purpose to gain clarity. So, to gain clarity, one often has to disrupt the sense of certainty. And this topic is particularly provocative and an excellent metaphor for the process of human decision intelligence.
Okay, so the topic is lying, but maybe gives you a little bit of pause in bringing up this topic.
It's just difficult to articulate. Like when we try to invert certain ideas or processes or way of thinking, right? When we flip things, it becomes potentially more confusing. And so that requires a lot more slowness and clarity to understand what's actually behind this. Like, why is it important to consider lying and particularly deception important to understanding truth? So we're taught socially, and especially in our puritanical American society, that we should eliminate lying and deception. We should get rid of it. And those who lie and deceive should be outcasts and should be shunned. And what is not actually accurate about that, and by the way, this is an ancient philosophical position, is that one cannot understand the truth without understanding deception first. Later, it was decided also by philosophers that we need to eliminate lying and deception to know the truth. We first pursue the truth, and we can know the truth by pursuing the truth. What we found in human decision intelligence is this inversion that does exist in history. It's not my original idea. Deception is not a pollutant to be scrubbed out, but it's an active ingredient in how people come to understand reality. And that unpacking lies and deception, and I'll explain how they're different, is data-rich fault lines that reveal where our mental architecture needs reinforcement. It's a way that we can upgrade the system that made the error believable in the first place. So deception and lying are critical to our decision-making process. That if we can't see how we deceive or how we are deceived, we can't actually trace and track what the truth is or where our particular points of failure are in our assumptions. So lying is definitely a place where we examine and re-examine assumptions. And the point of having this discussion and this topic is to see lying as important and necessary to discovering the truth. And we don't know the truth without actually digging into deception. So there's a function to deception. It is around this idea of it being less of a moral transgression and more of an epistemic event, or an event of knowing and coming to knowledge. Lying is necessary to understand the truth. That every complex decision contains assumptions that currently pass for truth. So if we never surface or stress test or even intentionally play with those assumptions, we can't graduate from them. And I think this is very, very apropos for our current state of society in terms of like fake news and how all of these lies or inaccuracies are perpetuated. The condition of lying isn't our intention to lie. The condition of lying is when deception occurs. So in other words, if I have the intention of lying to you, my intention doesn't matter. It's whether deception occurred or not. Or if I don't intend to lie, I'm intending to tell the truth, but a deception has occurred in my understanding of the truth. That humans are kind of thinking wrong about this, that we think in our culture that lying is about our intention. Did we intend to lie or did we not intend to lie? And that actually isn't good processing structure, that it really has nothing to do with our intention. The condition for lying is if deception occurred, whether we intended it or not.
Meaning that if someone has an intention to lie but doesn't effectively pull off the deception, no harm caused. But if someone doesn't intend to be dishonest, but something about their internal makeup or something about the way they delivered the information ends up deceiving someone in some kind of manipulative way, then even without the intention, with deception occurring, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Those two situations.
that's right. Oh, and oftentimes people believe their own lies because they don't understand that it's lies. 'Cause they haven't done this work. So, which is why lying and deception is so important to actually rearranging our assumptions and our understanding of what reality is. So, lying is really important to even play with, even with each other. Like, and so much of humor and comedy that uses lying and deception to make satire, right? Like that is the whole comedy.
Right. So when lying is used to create humor, obviously it's not to make the audience believe that these things occurred. It's fiction. That's actually a fantastic utility that we can find in lying when it's not intentionally to deceive and when the audience isn't actually deceived, when they laugh because they get how lying is playing with truths.
Through the lying that a truth is revealed in comedy. Now, deception usually doesn't happen because deception means that people would have to believe it and receive it as the truth. So here's the distinction between lying and deception. So a comedian can lie, say an bold outright lie, but it's not an actual lie unless it's received as the truth. So here's where we can play with lying because we can throw things out there as a way to see what people are experiencing. How true is that? Right? Like it is a way that we have inner dialogue and can unpack with critical analysis is through lying in order to parse and to see context and nuance of what is the truth. And we need lying to do that. It has a very functional role.
Like when a joke is something really outlandish and it's an obvious lie, but the crowd responds with like absolute laughter. And the comedian then, and even the audience knows that that lie, that falsehood hits so close to home, so close to the truth that that's what made the joke land. And that's what makes it funny versus some people in the audience who might choose to receive it as truth, as if the comedian is trying to deceive them. And I've been in situations and audiences where when people can't get that it's a lie to reveal truth and they take it seriously, they have a very strong negative reaction to the comedian.
Yeah. And lying doesn't equal a false statement, and truth doesn't equal a true statement. It is about deception. The condition where lying is actually met is through deception, receiving something as true. And so these distinctions actually become increasingly important as we use it as a way of processing. Now we can talk about the function of deception.
Perfect. That's where I was going next because you said we can play with lying. There's utility. Lying can help us uncover truth. What is the distinction?
With both lying and deception, it's a place where we can interrogate this lie or deception. And so we don't merely correct an error. We have to upgrade the system that made the error believable in the first place. And that's what's kind of interesting, right? Is that a lie is just a lie and we can believe it or not. But deception is when it's believable. What made it believable? What about that deception made it so?
What allowed people to be deceived? I mean, fake news is the perfect example here. What makes things that are so obviously not true deceive so many people? What makes them so believable to where they can be a form of deception on like a collective scale?
Every decision rests on something we assume to be true. And if that assumption turns out to be a lie, even an unintentional one, our entire chain of reasoning tilts. And so knowing how lies work is therefore knowing where our decisions can break.
How can we upgrade our system?
Well, there's kind of easy places to start. Something as simple as being in a business context, having OKRs delivered that everyone knows are impossible. How many people actually believe that those OKRs are going to happen or even good? That there's some delivery of what these standards and expectations are that are not true. And then we think about it, some in the business might not know that, right? So there might be deception present. And other people understand it as a lie, right? That it's not true. They're not receiving it
That's what
as
we
truth.
call take it with a grain of salt. Is that sort of the approach that you're talking about there?
Yeah, it's just an example of where we both notice something as a lie that isn't actually deception, or at the same time, where it could be a deception. Some people could be deceived. Or another one might be like, we're a family. Corporations and companies say this all the time, right? Well, it's like some people actually believe that. They receive that as truth and they operate on that truth, even when it is a fundamental deception. Companies aren't families, like not at all. That's a total lie that many are deceived by and many are not. Another personal one might be like when you ask someone in a relationship, if they're okay and they're like, I'm good. Well, depending on the tone or the context, the other person might know that that's a lie. And then also, there's some people that might receive that as the truth when it is a lie. Like that's the deception point, right? So it could go either way. Or somebody in a relationship says, I'm not jealous, but they actually are.
What you're saying is it's not positive or negative, it's opposite.
Let's assume it's not true. If it's received as not true, well, deception hasn't occurred. So the question mark here is, how does one evaluate statements as being accurate or inaccurate? And to what degree? If we're recognizing something as not true, well, it's not really a lie because deception hasn't occurred.
It's the receiver's orientation to the information being shared and their choice to believe it or to reject it that creates the opportunity to be deceived or not. Basically, you can't be lied to if you can see the truth. If we upgrade our own programming to be able to spot falsehoods for truths or moments where there's things being spoken that aren't meant as truth, then we can prevent ourselves from being deceived.
Yes, and it's actually stress testing them if we don't know. That's the point. It's not just knowing or not knowing, it's the process of knowing. That's why at the top I said it's more of an epistemic event. How do we know rather than an immediate moral transgression? Ethically speaking, it's recognizing that reception, not intention, defines the lie. And once this is recognized, it forces communicators to own the downstream effects. And in relationships, it means clarifying ambiguous signals like I'm good, or in the context of usually how people say that is that, are you good? Are we having a conversation? Are we not having a conversation?
And so it's asking the person who says, I'm good, to own the fact that they're putting that kind of ambiguity out there and that they're creating an instability in the receiver's ability to collect information and process it.
Yeah. And the point of why this is so critical to human decision intelligence, and I think humanity in general, is that encountering deception trains critical analysis and pattern recognition. And when we entertain contradictory frames, this whole process reveals which variables can swing the outcome or the belief. So truth becomes the intersection of many stress tested models, not just the dominance of one.
The primary thing that came to mind for me was that when someone is telling me a falsehood, I can kind of navigate that because I can see it as such. But the challenging area for me is when they are lying to themselves, when they're in some kind of self deception. That becomes something really challenging for me to navigate.
That is why it's such an important practice in human decision intelligence, is for this reason, is how can we gain a different level of analysis so that we can capture and see and check our assumptions, the assumptions of others. And then also just to really get clear about what are the conditions that make something a lie. Is deception not intention? And I think that one truth right there really helps. Like if we're actually looking at it that way, that it's not about our intention, it's about deception. That's been a huge differentiator in how I'm processing my assumptions and the assumptions of others.
It becomes a bit of a superpower. It's a form of resilience, I think, if lies bounce off you, if you don't take them as such, because you're able to process them in a way that they're not effective on you, essentially.
Deception and lying, just as a place of communication and a place of beliefs, is an active ingredient in how we understand. And that human decision intelligence treats lies in a similar way, that they're data rich fault lines that reveal where our mental constructs need reinforcement or adjustment. When we interrogate the lie, we don't merely correct an error, we upgrade the belief structure that made that error believable in the first place. This is the point of decision making, is how encountering deception trains critical analysis and pattern recognition so we can figure shit out.
I do have one example. It was in a working environment where a founder really wanted an employee to be present in the office, and the employee did not want to be present in the office. So the employee would keep surfacing different reasons, different excuses to not be there. And there were a lot of different conditions going on that made this complicated, but you and I were able to get to an analysis and then to tackle what was really going on versus tackling what was being said. And so this is where there was like a lot of surface communication happening that wasn't honest, but the true deception was an entirely different beast. I'm giving this example because it's still pretty surface. It's kind of an everyday thing that people could bump up against. But I think what you're saying is in terms of our decision making and our analysis, it's being able to trace what's underneath what's being said and examine that. And in this case, there was a ton that wasn't being overtly spoken, but all of the data was there and all of the behavior that is like, obviously, these people don't expect for this information to be believable. Like there's such obvious lies, but the deceit was something else. Interesting thing was that the founder just really wanted to stay committed to the information that was being presented on the surface, so much so that he started trying to track down where the lies were happening so that he could kind of pin the employee on the lie, like driving by their house to see that the street wasn't flooded, things like that. Instead of taking the opportunity to look at what is really being communicated to me here, where am I deceived? Where am I choosing to be deceived? And all I'm saying is that it could get to what was underneath it in a way that's a lot more effective versus ending up firing someone for being dishonest, where it was a much more complicated situation.
The whole point to this topic around lying is to evaluate the assumptions that we have. And to your point, Chelsea, this is very much about seeing what's underneath what is being said. What are the beliefs that are driving what we present as truth or what we are presenting as lies? So this examination has to go both ways. It has to be where we're examining that within ourselves, and also we're examining that within what others are saying. So this landscape becomes more complex and expansive, is it's not just evaluating what others are saying, but it's about what we're saying to ourselves and what we're saying to the world. So yeah, it is the place of asking questions and examining what are the assumptions that I have that are leading me to these beliefs, questioning those, and also questioning what are the assumptions that other people have that are leading to their beliefs or what they're saying that, may not be accurate. In this example, that was a founder that we had worked with, and it came to light that the examination was that she had a very good reason for not wanting to come into work. And so she was telling a lie in order to maintain her safety and her conditions from which she could be productive, right? And that wasn't being factored in. The topic of investigating one's belief structures or the statements they're saying are true that may not be, that's just one of the many points of evaluation that we had when we worked with this founder. This concept is much higher and it's conceptual in the point of principle. Like what we're trying to deliver here is the beginning, just the beginning to consider something in a way that people are not used to considering it. That is the point of this episode, not to actually give deep or expansive examples to try to clarify that. It's a little too complex right now. So when we work with people, we can go into this more. But what we find is really powerful is how important lies are to understanding the truth. Now, what we want to do is just let people sit with that. Like, here's the invitation. Those of you who are listening, meditate on the few bits of information that we've given you about the difference between intention and reception. Think about the importance of lying to get to the truth rather than the truth to get to the truth. Notice how these concepts surface in your conversations with others, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, that's the perfect invitation. The only point I'll make with the example is that because none of that was happening, it became really easy to get binary and say, because there's an intention to deceive, I'm going to morally put this person in a different category. And what we've started this conversation with, it's not the intention, it's actually the deception that creates the lie. It's easy to shortcut. And I think in our culture, one shortcut is if it's a lie, it's automatically wrong. They're judging based on intention to deceive versus effectiveness in deception. And that there's a whole lot more intelligence to be sourced from this interplay. And that's what is really interesting to me in this conversation is where are the places where we can source intelligence, but actually look for new treasure troves.
Yeah, exactly. And then if we want to take it a step further, it's like try to play around with lying. When I was young, I was on the debate team. And so much of gaining that muscle of debating is being able to play the devil's advocate, to be able to take a position that you do not believe in, that you do not even feel is true or accurate, and defend that position. And that whole process of debating in a way that's credible, in the way that you are developing and constructing a belief system. Lawyers do this, right? Which is really interesting of how can we convince the audience and how do we position ourselves to convince others on something that we don't even believe? How effective is that? And through that process and those mental abilities, we can construct ways that we can effectively deceive people in something that we don't even believe. What does that mean? How is that happening in other parts of our life? And where are we doing that to ourselves? It's an absolute skill. We know that people who understand lies are the ones who are more deeply connected to the truth. I mean, that's why we hire criminals to come work for justice systems, is because they were so good at knowing the system and where it breaks and using the system against itself. They understand the system better than anyone else. Another invitation is to stop seeing it as such a moral and ethical position on the surface. Try it out. Play with lying. I mean, we do this with our children all the time, right? Is that how do our children learn to recognize the truth if you're not telling them lies? Like, oh no, that's not green, that's red. And then they're confused because they thought it was something, and then an adult and a person of authority is telling them that's different. And then they have to kind of sort through and ask questions, and then they can understand this person isn't telling me the truth. That's a really important developmental skill that children and developing minds learn what is the truth through grappling with what is a lie.
The child example is a great one with the color because it's so simple that at the end of that, they become really, really dead sure that no, it actually is red because they've gone through the cognitive process to analyze, ask, vet, and decide for themselves. And so then it isn't just like a take it or leave it. They can't be deceived once they've engaged the cognitive process of vetting this information.
The point of this topic is to be less limited in how we are considering the truth and lies, and what kind of information and analysis and assumptions can we test in ways that are different from how we've been taught.
You started with talking about this inversion, this paradox, using deception to get to truth. We talk about how in paradox, two things can be simultaneously true.
Yeah. And at the top, I kind of said that this topic is a really good metaphor for the whole process of human decision intelligence. And I think it's because of this paradox that it's not quite what it seems, and that every lie starts with a choice to believe and receive it as truth. And so, how interesting that it's just a little bit different than what we thought, and how these half truths or semi truths is all important to gathering information, vetting information, and then using that information in intelligent, masterful ways to make a decision. So this topic is a little bit philosophical and a little bit less direct, and that's exactly right. And that's the call, is to step in to places that are less clear and more confusing, because that's a place where we can develop growth. And so this one is definitely disrupting certainty. I don't know if it's adding clarity yet, but I think it is the beginning of coming to more clarity, right? And the process of evaluating lies and to speaking lies to get to the truth is the process of developing clarity.